Jumping the global warming shark. There's a moment near the end of Ayn Rand's mostly brilliant Atlas Shrugged where she details the unveiling of various government-funded boondoggles whose development we track as the story unfolds. All of them end in tragedy and mass death. From trains asphyxiating their passengers to sonic weapons killing spectators, the hubris and ineptitude of the rentier class which took over the U.S. government was on display in all its glory. So every time I see some harebrained idea in service of a politically motivated lie, I just look at my wife, shake my head, and say, Act 3, Atlas Shrugged, hon. The latest is a patently insane idea of dimming the sun by dispersing sulfate particles into the atmosphere to reflect and absorb some of the energy coming from it to slow the rate of global warming. I would hope, at the very least, they are thinking of something thoroughly inert like barium sulfate, but they aren't. They are talking about injecting SO2 into the atmosphere. Another word for SO2 is smog. This is the very compound we have been regulating power plants not to emit. This is the cause of acid rain. So that's it, folks. That's our Hobbesian choice now. Smog, or a nice, cozy, warm home with abundant food and mild weather for most of the planet. The sick Marxists that think they run this planet would choose smog every time. I would file this under Crazy Town, but check my link above to the RT article. This was written up by Reuters, so this is a trial balloon of an idea for the public to swallow. The mind boggles at the arrogance of people who were so thoroughly caught up in their own messianic insanity that they need to save us all because we won't stop burning oil, gas, and coal to our own betterment. What's the biggest impediment to this plan, the researchers conclude? It's not cost, because actually that's their selling point. By their calculations, it would be cheaper than any other solution. No, it's that it would be impossible to keep it secret from the people they were poisoning. I shit you not. The authors note that no one in their right mind would be okay with this plan, so it would have to be done by rational actors, a tortured use of that term if I ever heard it, in secret, which would be impossible because of the sheer number of aircraft flying overhead smogging up the air. And what's worse, of course, is that this is the kind of research we get for our hard-earned tax dollars. Morons torturing bad models on CO2-induced warming forcing, which have proven to be demonstrably false, producing a math which suggests a cost-efficient way to stop AGW is to pollute the frickin' air. The only good news about all of this is that this paper likely didn't cost us all that much because it was just the idle musings of a bunch of people trying to justify their current and future grant money. It's not like they asked for billions to do a test run and poison millions. And yet this scheme, cheap as it may be relative to expropriating 6 to 10% of global production to make energy more expensive, which is what we're currently doing, is still hideously expensive relative to doing real science, which produced a mathematical model of the sun's output which is actually accurate in both backtesting and in its predictions since it was first published. And that model tells us that the sun is going into the kind of hibernation we've not experienced as a civilization over the next 30 years, possibly the next 300 to 400. The work is from Dr. Valentina Zarkova, and it is stunning. Now, as a chemist with a strong background in spectroscopy of all types, both in undergraduate research and decades of professional experience, I understand what she was talking about. The higher order math is beyond me a little, but it's ultimately no different than any other mathematical transformation like a Fourier transform, which is used by the society every day to unpack complex data. I watched her most recent presentations literally agog at not only the simplicity but the beauty of her leaps of logic about how the sun operates. She did what any good scientist does. She asked very simple questions and then sought out data and a methodology to answer that question. And that question ultimately came down to, since we know that the sun's output has predictable cycles, thanks to sunspot cycles, and we know now what sunspots are, is the sun's magnetic field output over time an aggregate of multiple smaller fields with predictable oscillations? The answer is most affirmatively yes. And you don't have to be an astrophysicist to understand the logic of her presentation. I urge you to go to YouTube and look at it, spend the 93 minutes. It's worth every second of your life, unlike so much of everything else you ingest on the internet. And the cooling effect from a severe drop in the sun's magnetic field greatly dwarfs any warming projections of the AGW alarmist worst-case scenario thanks to CO2. And now we have NASA finally admitting that the upper atmosphere is cooling off at a rate we've never measured. Of course, those like myself who have followed such data for the past few years already knew this. So it's truly time to put this global warming nonsense to bed. It is, like so many other cultural issues we are dealing with right now, just another aspect of a mass solipsistic descent into madness induced by a century of Marxism decrying the wealth created by access to cheap, abundant energy and the dislocation we experience thanks to rapid industrialization a century ago. This is just more original sin doctrine to control people by their betters who live lives of such wealth the term conspicuous consumption seems the grossest of understatement. And global warming is there wanting to revert us back to savages to save the planet, demanding sacrifice to the mother planet the way we used to sacrifice them to the sun god to ensure abundant harvests. Life is hard enough without a bunch of guilt-ridden busybodies running around succeeding at making it harder. Our hubris will be our downfall, not burning a little more oil. I simply cannot get upset about there being a slightly higher concentration of heat in our corner of a cold, dark, hostile universe that is actively trying to kill all of us all the time. If Dr. Sarkova is right, the next few decades in particular will be the hardest mankind has faced in millennia. And then we will be truly thankful for the technology created by capitalism, which will help us mitigate the worst of it. In fact, I think I need to change my diet to fart more. Think globally, act locally, as it were.